The first reading today is one of my probably top 5 favorite scripture passages of all time. It's the story of Elijah and his desire to seek God. He's just fled from the persecution of the prophets of Baal. And so he's hiding in a cave, and he asks for God to reveal himself, and God says, I will pass by you. But Elijah hears wind, but he realizes that God isn't in the wind. He sees or hears and feels an earthquake, but God is not in that. There's fire, but God is not in the fire. And then after that it says, there was a tiny whispering sound, and when he heard this, Elijah hid his face in his cloak. I think that we do well, I would think, to a question I'd like us to just think about is, do we want God to be loud? Do we want God to be earthquakes and fire and wind? And I think that at least there's a part of us that desires that. At least that would give us the excuse to run from him. Certainly, that is how the appearance of God is described throughout the Old Testament, at least in various spots. I think most notably on Sinai, Mount Sinai, when God comes to the Israelite people. He is described as being thunder and lightning and earthquakes and fire and so forth. What is going on in these stories? I have no doubt that there was actually fire and thunder and terror and fear and earthquakes and smoke. So how is it then that God is this whispering sound and not actually those things? I think that we can say what is happening in those stories is perfection coming into contact with our sinful world. God is perfect and unchanging, and so when he comes back into the story of humanity, of course, in one sense, he never left. He's holding it and everything in existence in every moment. But in another sense, he's not present to humanity in the way that he was in the garden at the beginning of time. And so when he comes back into our timeline in that way, in a real way, there is an epic clash that produces thunder and smoke and earthquakes and lightning. One example or analogy might be an asteroid that passes silently through space, but when it hits Earth's atmosphere, there is fire, smoke, and thunder, and potentially earthquakes and explosions if it makes it to Earth's surface. So is God when he appears in our world. Or to use another analogy, just as two opposite air masses that are silent, when they collide, can create a thunderstorm, so it is when the perfect God encounters the brokenness and sin of our humanity. So again, today, although there is smoke and fire and lightning, that is the result of perfection coming back into our atmosphere. Those things are effects of God drawing near, but God is not in those fireworks. We know that God ultimately has the plan of being able to be in our presence without the accompanying pyrotechnics. He ultimately takes on human flesh, cloaking himself in our humanity. Thus, he's able to walk about and be in our midst in a way that doesn't produce the accompanying effects that we see in the Old Testament. God, in a sense, hides his glory in human flesh. And ultimately, again, as well, now he continues to cloak himself in the appearance of bread and wine in the Eucharist. In conclusion, Christ is stillness, he is peace, he is rest for the weary. Let us seek him and let us seek refuge in him, away from the pyrotechnics of our world on a daily basis.